Southeast Asia, the 13th century, a land of rivers and jungle. Dense forest covering everything, rivers running fast and dark. The heat here is suffocating. The humidity, relentless. Nothing moves quickly through this landscape, except the people who grew up in it. The kingdom of Jai Viet, ancient, independent, and about to face the most powerful military force the world had ever seen. 3 times, and 3 times Vietnam sent them home. At the height of its power, the Mongol Empire controlled more land than any empire in history, from China to Poland, from Korea to Persia. Every kingdom it tried to conquer, it conquered. The Mongols did not negotiate. They sent a message: surrender or be destroyed. If you refused, history left examples. Baghdad, 1258, 200,000 dead. The Great Library burned. The Islamic Golden Age ended in a week. By 1260, no army had stopped the Mongols in open battle. No city wall had held them for long. Kublai Khan had already conquered China. Korea paid tribute. Vietnam was next on his list. He sent envoys to the Tran court, demanding tribute and passage for his armies. The Tran king did something no one expected. He refused. Then he arrested the envoys. Vietnam had just declared war on the most powerful empire in the world. The Vietnamese king's advisors told him, "You have just made the most powerful enemy in the world." Some in the court wanted to send a letter of apology. Release the envoys. Negotiate. Trần Hưng Đạo said, "There is nothing to negotiate. Either we fight or we disappear." The king listened to Trần Hưng Đạo. They would fight. To understand what Vietnam was facing, you need to understand the Mongol military system. Genghis Khan had built it from scratch in the early 1200s. Speed was the foundation. Mongol cavalry could cover 100 miles a day. European armies of the same era managed 10. Every Mongol soldier was a horseman from birth. He could fire arrows at full gallop. He could live off the land. No supply wagons, no fixed camps. The Mongol army moved faster than its enemies could react. And then there was the psychological weapon. Submit and live. Resist, and your city will not exist afterward. It worked. Most kingdoms submitted without a battle. Those that fought were made into examples. Kublai Khan in 1260 had inherited a perfect record. No army had stopped them. No strategy had delayed them for more than one campaign. He had conquered China. The Song dynasty fell in 1279. Korea sent tribute. Japan was next. He sent the tribute demand to Vietnam. A formality, he assumed. The refusal reached Khan Balik 3 weeks later. Kublai Khan read the message. Then he read it again. He ordered the army to march south. The Mongol general Uriankadai had already conquered Yunnan in southern China. Now he was ordered south, into Vietnam, into the jungle. He did not worry. His army had never failed. The army crossed the northern border of Vietnam in December 1257. They expected a kingdom. They found a silence. Trần Hưng Đạo had already moved. Every granary emptied. Every supply depot burned. Every boat on the river sunk or hidden upstream. The capital evacuated. Hundreds of thousands of people simply gone. When the Mongols arrived at Thung Long, they found empty streets. No victory to claim. No food to seize. No enemy to destroy. The man who had arranged this was watching from the jungle. Trần Hưng Đạo, prince of the Tran dynasty, general, scholar. He had written extensively on warfare. His treatise is still studied in Vietnam today. He understood his country the way no foreign invader ever could. He knew every river, every jungle path, every tidal pattern. He had developed one central principle: do not fight the Mongols the way they want to fight. The Mongols needed speed. Trần Hưng Đạo would deny them speed. The Mongols needed to live off the land. He would leave them nothing. The Mongols needed a decisive battle. He would never give them one. In the tropical heat, the greatest cavalry army in the world becomes something different. It becomes a slow, sick, starving force looking for an enemy that isn't there. Trần Hưng Đạo did not need to defeat 500,000 soldiers. He needed to wait until they had already defeated themselves. The first invasion came in December 1257. Uriyangqadai's army moved fast, expecting to find resistance. They found the same thing everywhere. Nothing. The army reached Thung Long. The capital was empty. No food, no enemy, no victory. From the jungle, the Vietnamese army watched and waited. Small raids began. Supply lines attacked. Patrols ambushed. Mongol cavalry was nearly useless in dense jungle. You cannot charge through undergrowth. You cannot see the enemy. Disease moved through the Mongol camp. Heat, malaria, dysentery. Their horses, bred for cold steppe, were dying in the tropical heat. 3 months into the campaign, the army was deteriorating fast. Trần Hưng Đạo chose this moment. At the Battle of Dong Bo Giao, Vietnamese forces counterattacked. A weakened, sick, starving Mongol force was driven back north. 6 months, zero strategic gain. The first invasion was over. Kublai Khan received the report in Khan Balik. He sent another tribute demand. Vietnam refused again. For the Mongols, this was standard procedure. Send more, send bigger. It had always worked before. He began planning immediately. He had 2 questions. Where will they come from? And what do they need to survive? The answers shaped everything. When Uriyangqadai's army crossed the border, the trap was already set. And when the Mongols retreated 6 months later, they left behind something important. They confirmed everything Trần Hưng Đạo had theorized. The jungle worked. The scorched earth worked. The waiting worked. He had 6 years before the next invasion. He used them. New river fortifications, new supply caches hidden in the jungle, new ambush routes mapped. When the second invasion came, he was more ready than before. In 1285, the second invasion began. Kublai Khan sent his own son, Prince Togun, to command. The army numbered 300,000 to 500,000 soldiers, the largest force the Mongols had ever sent against a single target. Kublai Khan was not taking chances. Vietnam looked at 500,000 Mongol soldiers approaching its border, and the Tran court did something extraordinary. They called an assembly. The Hoi Nghi Dien Hong, the Parliament of Elders, every elderly man in the kingdom was invited. The king stood before them. He asked one question: should Vietnam fight or submit? Thousands of old men, farmers, scholars, former soldiers. The answer came back in a single word, shouted from every corner: fight. Trần Hưng Đạo tattooed his arm. Kill the Mongols. He distributed his military treaties to every officer. Then he executed the same plan. Again, the capital was evacuated. The countryside stripped bare. 500,000 Mongol soldiers marched into an empty country. Again, no food, no enemy to fight. The same trap. Weeks passed. Disease and heat began working immediately. More soldiers, more mouths, less food. Togun sent word to his father: we need supply ships from the sea. A Mongol fleet was dispatched to resupply the army by sea. Trần Hưng Đạo intercepted it. At the battles of Ham Tu and Chuang Duong, the Mongol supply fleet was destroyed. The land army was cut off. No food coming, no reinforcements. Trần Hưng Đạo launched his counteroffensive. Vietnamese forces emerged from the jungle across 100 different points simultaneously. Not a single massive battle. 100 small ones everywhere at once. The 500,000-strong Mongol army began to collapse. Togun ordered retreat north. The retreat became a disaster. Of the 500,000 who entered Vietnam, a fraction returned. Kublai Khan received the second report. He had sent his own son, with the largest army ever assembled. And Vietnam had done it again. Before the third invasion, it is worth understanding what Trần Hưng Đạo was doing, because it was not simply run and hide. It was a precisely engineered system for defeating a specific enemy. The Mongols were unbeatable in open terrain with a supply line. Remove both. Now you have a different army, just a large group of men in an unfamiliar place. Vietnam's river and jungle system made cavalry nearly useless. The scorched earth policy meant they could not live off the land. A slow Mongol army is not a Mongol army. It is just a large group of men. Malaria kills armies. It does not distinguish between invincible cavalry and foot soldiers. Tran calculated that time was always on his side. Every week the Mongols stayed. They got weaker. Every week he waited. The jungle fought for him. It worked twice. For the third invasion, he added one more element: the river. After the second invasion, Kublai Khan sat with his generals for 6 months. Why had speed failed? Because there was nowhere to go fast. Why had numbers failed? Because there was nothing to eat. Why had 2 invasions failed? The same reason. They both ran out of food. His solution? Solve the supply problem from the sea. He ordered the construction of the largest supply fleet in Mongol history. 500 ships, enough to feed an army indefinitely. Trần Hưng Đạo received intelligence reports about the fleet being built. He understood immediately. This time, the threat was naval. He went to the Bac Giang River. He measured it. He walked it at low tide. He came back with a plan. In 1287, Kublai Khan launched the third invasion. This time, Kublai Khan had solved the supply problem. He thought a massive fleet, over 500 ships, would sail up the Vietnamese coast, enter the river system, supply the land army directly. The fleet was commanded by Admiral O Man Nhi, an experienced and ruthless commander. He had fought in a dozen campaigns. The land army crossed the northern border. Again, the capital was evacuated again. Everything burned again. The same trap set again. But Trần Hưng Đạo had prepared something extra. He had studied the Bac Giang River for years. The Bac Giang had a tidal estuary, wide at high tide, shallow and deadly at low tide. Thousands of iron-tipped wooden stakes driven into the riverbed, positioned precisely at the depth where high tide would hide them. Low tide would not. Then he sent a decoy Vietnamese fleet to meet the Mongols at the river mouth. The Vietnamese boats engaged briefly, then fled upriver. O Man Nhi ordered the fleet to pursue. It was high tide. The stakes were invisible beneath the surface. 500 Mongol ships entered the Bac Giang River at full speed. They moved deep into the estuary. Then the tide began to go out. The water level dropped. Stakes emerged from the mud. The lead ships hit them. Ships behind crashed into those in front. In minutes, the entire fleet was jammed, impaled, colliding, immobilized. From both banks, Vietnamese soldiers emerged. Fire arrows, boarding parties, the hidden fleet attacking from the rear. Character 3 fought desperately, his flagship surrounded. He was captured, dragged from his burning ship. Of 500 Mongol ships, almost none escaped. Vietnamese soldiers on both banks had been waiting in the mangroves for days. They had watched the tide rise and fall twice a day, checking the stakes were still hidden. When the Mongol fleet entered, the signal went through the jungle like fire. Every position activated simultaneously. The fire arrows hit impaled ships that could not move. The boarding parties found Mongol crews fighting the current, the stakes, and each other. The river became a trap that closed from every direction at once. The fleet was gone. The land army had no resupply, no hope. Togan ordered retreat. The third collapse was the worst. Vietnamese forces pursued the retreating army all the way to the northern border. The scale of the third defeat was unlike anything the Mongols had experienced. They had conquered Russia in 3 campaigns, China in 1 generation. Vietnam defeated them 3 times. Word spread through the Mongol Empire. There is a country in the south that cannot be taken. Other kingdoms that had been considering resistance took note. Japan had already refused Kublai Khan twice. The typhoons had helped, but Vietnam had done something different. Vietnam had defeated them with strategy, not weather, not luck, a planned, engineered, repeatable system. and Trần Hưng Đạo had used it 3 times in a row. Not one invasion had achieved a single strategic objective. Kublai Khan considered a 4th invasion. He never launched it. Vietnam remained independent, the only country in Asia to defeat the Mongols 3 times. Kublai Khan died in 1294, still technically at war with Vietnam. Trần Hưng Đạo died in 1300. His last recorded words, "Cultivate the people's will to fight. That is your only wall." His name became a word for resistance itself. When France occupied Vietnam 6 centuries later, Vietnamese resistance fighters invoked his name. When America fought there in the 20th century, his tactics were still in the manuals. Scorched earth, jungle, patience, counterattack when the enemy is broken. Some strategies work because they are clever. This one worked because it was true. Today, Trần Hưng Đạo is worshipped as a deity in Vietnam, not remembered, worshipped. There are more temples to him than to any other historical figure in the country. The Bắc Giang River still runs through the same muddy estuary. At low tide, you can still see wooden stakes in the riverbed. The river remembers. If you want more stories about impossible victories and forgotten military genius, subscribe. Every week, another battle that changed the world.